Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. If you are new, I invite you to subscribe. It really does mean the world. If you're returning, thanks again for spending some time with me and choosing to listen to me ramble. Either way, if you're new or returning, you're likely here for one of three reasons. One being film and TV reviews and literature reviews. Most of my film reviews are done with my partner, Chad. Well, my partner in all things cinema, he's taken. And our newest Chattamel movie hour actually just premiered this morning, Color Out of Space, and it's a little bit of a double feature because we do talk about the documentary Lost Soul, and if you watch it, you'll see why those two go hand in hand. But yeah, if you're interested in Nicolas Cage, which I assume everybody is, if you're interested in the work of H.P. Lovecraft, or more niche, if you're interested in the work of Richard Stanley, I highly recommend you watch our newest movie hour. We're super proud of it and it's a lot of fun. The other reason you might find yourself here is because of my Politics of Periods series, which delves into the politics of menstrual equity, specifically what you can do to support the homeless and underserved women in your communities get the menstrual hygiene products that they need. So please check those out. Those are super important to me, and I think it's critical that that information get disseminated. Finally, the third pillar of my channel is Disney content, and if you're here for Disney content, it's your lucky day. It's, of course, time to represent Epcot. Poor baby girl. She's in a state right now. But hopefully when the quarantine nightmare passes, she will be resurrected from the ashes like the phoenix that she is. Anyways, I digress. Cheers. I am here doing something that I've been working on continuously now for 7 months, which is my Women of Walt Disney Imagineering series. This is now the 6th video in the series, and I have about 6 more coming down the pike. Thus far, I have, and these will all be linked in the iCards, I've done the OG, Miss Harriet Burns, the original woman of WED. We've done Alice Davis. We've done Miss Dorothea Redmond. We've done Leota Toombs, and we've done the Queen herself, Mary Blair. Today we're going to jump a little bit in time and do a discussion of one of the more contemporary Disney Imagineers, Miss Rebecca or Becky Bishop. And as I say and preface all of these videos, as I say at the beginning of all of these profiles, is I am always shocked at how little information there is about these women. Fortunately, in addition to The Queens of Animation, which is a book I highly recommend and linked in the description of all of the profiles, and we'll do so again here, there is a new book coming out in October called Women of Imagineering, 12 Careers, 12 Theme Parks, and Countless Stories. And it is only because of my learning of this publication that I learned of Miss Rebecca Bishop. So, of course, the book's not out yet. Again, it's coming out in October, but it inspired me to do more digging and try and find out more about some of the, again, more contemporary women of Walt Disney Imagineering. So, without further ado, let's get into Miss Becky Bishop's contributions to the Walt Disney Company. Cheers. So, in order to talk about Miss Bishop, I'm going to take a little bit of a step back and talk about a gentleman that I had heard of but didn't really know much about, and it's a gentleman named Bill Evans. Now, Bill Evans worked for the Walt Disney Company for years. He's technically retired. He retired in '75, but he actually still worked for the company in an unofficial advisory or consultative capacity for decades afterwards. But Bill Evans actually, he and his brother were hired to do landscaping on Walt and Lillian's home way back in the 40s, and Walt loved his work so much that he invited him to come work for the Walt Disney Company and basically, he named him the director of landscape design for the Walt Disney Company, which at the time was WED. So he went on to eventually help design the landscaping that you see today at Disneyland. And again, he retired in '75 and continued to do work and consult with the current landscape architects, including Miss Bishop. he was, and he went on to work with the Walt Disney World development post 75 as well. So he's worked both in Anaheim and in Orlando. But Becky was one of his proteges, and she recalls one of the first times, or perhaps it was the first time that she met Bill, when she was actually an intern at WED. This was in 1980, I believe. And at the time, she was already aware of Bill Evans. I mean, obviously, if you're going to be, what? This humidity in this house. I mean, what? Sorry, y'all. Because this is what's important now. Let me zhuzh. Just let me zhuzh. Alright, whatever. It's as good as it's going to get. She was an intern at WED in 1980. And she was a little bit intimidated. Obviously, she was already very familiar with his body of work. She was already a fan of his at this time. And, you know, even in the 1980s, I talked about this in all of the previous profiles that I've done. It's Disney, the Walt Disney Company, Walt Disney Studios, the parks, WED. It was all a boys' club. And it probably still is to a great degree, and it clearly was in the 1980s. She talks about being a little bit intimidated because Bill was always inclined to greet his male coworkers with handshakes, pats on the backs, you know, stuff like that. And I think her being around, he was a little intimidated to treat her the same way. But eventually, you know, once they got to know each other, the guards came down, and he became her mentor, his protege, and you know, a really great relationship was formed. She went on to do work at Epcot, specifically the Wonders of Life Pavilion, RIP. She most famously, though, worked on Expedition Everest. So if you're not familiar with Expedition Everest, it's a roller coaster in the Nepalese, Tibet, Asia portion of Animal Kingdom, which opened in 99. Expedition Everest did not open until 2006. And if you're at all familiar with Imagineering, or specifically the Imagineers behind Animal Kingdom, you know Mr. Joe Rohde is the genius behind bringing that that world to life. And she worked under the tutelage of Joe Rohde, obviously, and was one of the head landscape architects for the land itself, i.e. the Asia portion of Animal Kingdom, more specifically working on Expedition Everest. She was quoted as saying, "We built a landscape consistent with what trekkers might actually encounter on a pilgrimage to the botanically rich Everest region. It's natural looking, and unkempt, like it has always been there." If you've had the privilege of going to Animal Kingdom, it is, I would say it's my favorite theme park at the domestic Disney resorts, except for Epcot exists. So if Epcot weren't on the table, Animal Kingdom would be number one. It's currently my number two. Obviously, you can do the math there. But if you've ever had the privilege of going to Animal Kingdom, you know what a GD masterpiece that theme park is. Animal Kingdom is the largest theme park in the world and the second largest amusement park in the world. Amusement, the differentiation there being amusement parks have rides, theme parks are themed and don't necessarily have rides, or specifically thrill rides. So the scope of that park, the attention to detail, I've been going for, 11 years, and I still haven't seen the entire park, and I likely never will. You can just get lost in the, again, the attention to detail. I've not been to any of the countries that are represented in that park, Asia, Africa. Clearly I have not been back to the, Mesozoic era, because there is Dinoland USA, but you take my point. It is such a rich environment, and take the rides out of it, you have some of the most beautiful animal enclosures, some of the most well-engineered animal enclosures and showcases. Jane Goodall has, as you see in the Imagineering story, Jane Goodall actually was an advisor and still is for that park to ensure that the animals that are there are receiving the highest level of care. So Animal Kingdom is set apart from anything I've ever seen theme park wise, even within the Walt Disney Company. And knowing that Miss Bishop had a hand in not only designing but engineering the ride itself, which is a badass roller coaster. I mean, it goes backwards. What more do you want? But you know, the queue for Expedition Everest in itself is, you know, quite literally, it's an attraction, and it's worth the price of admission just to, you know, walk through these places. And when I go to Expedition Everest, I actually don't use fast passes because I like the line so much. Fun fact that nobody's going to care about but me, but one of my grad school professors who teaches in the Hindu and, well, he teaches in the Eastern religions department, was actually a consultant on designing the ride and the queue for Expedition Everest. They wanted to make sure that they were being respectful to Tibetan and Nepalese cultures, and yeah, I just thought that might be a fun factoid to share. It's a small world after all. But it's so interesting to learn like how much detail she put into creating not just that land, but you know, specifically the queue and the ride itself. They wanted to emulate the lowlands surrounding Mount Everest. More than 900 bamboo plants, 10 species of trees, and 110 species of shrubs were planted over areas of the 6.2 area terrain. That's just the 6.2 acres of land that is that one section of Animal Kingdom. I mean, it's pretty impressive. The landscape architects that she oversaw carefully selected plant varieties that would thrive in Florida climate while capturing the look and feel of Asia. You know, they have obviously giant bamboo, white eucalyptus, that actually hug all of the, you know, the switchbacks in the queue. I mean, it's crazy. They created a mythical village called Circazong, which is where you're supposedly at while you're in Everest, in the line and around the ride. It's just incredible. They implemented scruffy bushes, bottle brush, camphor trees, yucca plants to replicate the rugged terrain that would be found in the foothills of the Himalayas. She's quoted as saying the environment is hard to duplicate, which I can imagine. So they actually took usual species found in and around Florida and presented them in an unusual way. She said, quote, "What we would do is almost guarantee that you would get the look that you wanted." So they would do stuff like plant a Hollywood juniper plant, and they would cut it back in different forms and fashions to make it look like it was from the Himalayan region. We incorporated characteristics from Bhutan, Mustang, and Kathmandu into the landscape design to capture its true diversity. She goes on to say that we wanted to capture usual species but present them in an unusual way, which when you have this knowledge now and you go back and you walk through Animal Kingdom, specifically Asia, and you're in the line for Expedition Everest, it's going to be so much fun, you know, when the world reopens after the apocalypse ends, to really go back with new eyes and really pay attention to the foliage and the landscaping, and knowing what went into it is just going to bring a whole new level of appreciation to the ride and the parks. Yeah, so she actually, in 2002, when they were doing their exploratory trip before before Expedition Everest came into existence, they literally scoured all of the Himalayan foothills, Nepal, Bhutan, and, you know, she sketched out trees from all of these areas, also the architecture, and they wanted to create authenticity. And I think when you're riding Expedition Everest and you're in the line or you're in Asia in general, you really feel that. Again, the entire park lends a feeling of authenticity, but now knowing this, I mean, it takes it to a whole new level. A variety of textured plants and bushes were used to distinguish shady, wet regions from drier conditions. A grassy ground cover fills a bamboo-filled courtyard, giving the impression that someone had once carefully tended the area. Near the mandir, an ornate shrine to the Yeti, which is in the line for Expedition. It feels grotto-like, with greener, water-loving grasses and plants situated around the stream bed. As guests board the runaway train destined for Mount Everest, they may notice the California Chirel, or chaparral, plants and overgrown remnants of an abandoned tea plantation that once sprawled throughout the valley. To emphasize the forest perspective technique, she and her fellow landscape architects planted tall bamboo, pines, and swaying reeds to blur the horizon of the mountain range, making it appear more distant. When the train plummets down the mountainside, the tracks seem to disappear into a wilderness filled with pine trees and moss-covered oaks, leaving onlookers wondering about the outcome of the journey. So this has just been a little bit of an introduction into her body of work. I struggled to find more information about the work that she did in Epcot, specifically Wonders of Life. And I'm hoping that when the book comes out, it will have a lot more information on her. If you, again, have had the privilege to visit any of the Walt Disney parks, whether in California or in Florida or, of course, internationally, landscaping outside of Animal Kingdom, landscaping in general is such a huge part of not only the look and feel of the lands and the worlds that you're in, but really from an engineering perspective. I mean, go beyond the aesthetics of it. You know, the way that they block out the outside world, the way forced perspective is used. It's not just with buildings. I mean, the landscaping really plays a huge part in what you see, what you don't see, and how you feel as you move from one place to another and get lost in it. So knowing that landscaping plays such an important role in the domestic parks, the international parks, which I've yet had the privilege of visiting, it just lends an entire new layer of experience. So next time you go, pay attention not just to the theming and the architecture and the buildings themselves, but to the greenery, the foliage, the landscaping itself. It plays such a huge part, not just in the theme parks, but in the resorts as well. And going beyond the aesthetics of the landscape design, looking at it from just a sheer engineering perspective, how Walt Disney World, specifically Disneyland, which is on such a small plot of land surrounded by highways and just regular thoroughfares, how the berm, if you're not familiar with the berm, it's basically the kind of it's like a henge, building a henge, are we? It's like a artificial hill that's built, and then that is then used as a perimeter to block out what you see when you're inside the park. That was a horrible articulation, but hopefully you get it. But just from an engineering perspective, the landscaping that goes into just building berms around the theme parks to obstruct your view of the outside world and let you really escape into the world of yesterday, tomorrow. It's incredible. And yeah, I hope that when the world reopens and the apocalypse is over, next time you get a chance to go to one of the parks, pay attention to what's going on the ground and all around you. And I hope that lends you another level of appreciation of the parks. And of course, we have Miss Rebecca Bishop, landscape architect, to thank for a lot of what we see. So I hope you enjoyed this profile of Miss Becky Bishop. Stay tuned because I have quite a few more ladies coming. I've got Eli Erlandson, Julie Svensson, Peggy Ferris, Kathy Rogers, some of whom are going to be in that upcoming book coming out. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, please give it a thumbs up, and more importantly, comment below. I would love to learn anything more about these women that I haven't been able to find out. So with that being said, I will see you guys on the other side. Thanks for watching. Cheers.